just wing it. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Bill Muck. He is our guest speaker. Was in the United States Air Force, Captain Bill Muck. He is a former KC-135A and B-1B pilot from 1979 to 1990. His work in the initial development of the B-1A and also the B-1B paved the way for the development of the CAS Consolidated Aircraft Support System, allowing the aircraft to be serviced and maintained with minimal ground support equipment. Upon leaving the Air Force, Bill spent many years in graphic design before entering into the ministry. Bill pastored a church in Reno, Nevada for almost 15 years before moving to North Idaho in October of 2020. Bill is currently the senior pastor at Crossroads Community Church in Rose Lake and is also the executive director of One Site for Seniors, a faith-based nonprofit company that helps seniors with Alzheimer's and dementia and their caregivers. Bill will expand on the experiences from his military career and beyond today.
Let me first of all thank you. Thank you for honoring not only veterans, but thank you for honoring our community. Thank you for being out on a day like this when most of us would probably rather be in front of a warm fire, and yet here you are. What a wonderful community we live in, and what a wonderful community you represent to our veterans. So thank you. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a bad day? Well, I'm sure we'd all say yes, of course we have, but have you ever had a really, really bad, horrible, completely bad day? The kind of day where you just would wonder to yourself, can it get any worse? Well, it can, and let me tell you about one of those days. I walked out to my pickup truck at about 10 minutes till 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. It was overcast, much like today, except it was raining, and there was a strong wind out of the west. I was scheduled to fly a refueling mission that would take me over the plains of Wyoming. Our takeoff time was 10 a.m., and I needed to be at base operations for a crew briefing at 8 a.m. But when I got to my truck, I saw that it had a flat tire in the front. Great. After spending 30 minutes in the rain changing the flat tire, I was finally on my way to base ops, 20 minutes late. I pulled into the parking lot and ran into the crew briefing area. The rest of my crew was already there waiting impatiently for me. We raced through the final mission briefing. We had done mission planning the day before, so there wasn't really a whole lot to discuss. We received the weather forecast. Our flight was to expect rain, thunderstorms, and possibly severe turbulence upon takeoff. We were scheduled to do a mid-air refueling of a B-52 somewhere over a remote stretch of Wyoming. It was one of my final flights at Castle Air Force Base in California. My training as a KC-135 pilot was nearly complete, and this mission was my last one before my first solo flight. If I did well on this mission, I would be scheduled to fly a solo flight the very next week, and I would graduate from flight training. But this mission was also what they call a check ride. A check ride is when a veteran instructor pilot would sit between the pilot and co-pilot in a specially designed jump seat. His whole purpose was to evaluate and critique every move, every decision that you make. Think of it as if you're taking a driver's test and an examiner is sitting right next to you. He sees everything. He constantly writes on his clipboard. He shows no emotion. He says nothing. Oh, but he watches everything you do. Well, our pre-flight went pretty smoothly. The fuel load was correctly balanced. The flight controls felt smooth. The electrical power was stable. At engine start, all 4 engines responded and everything seemed perfectly normal. Finally, I taxied out to the end of runway 31, ready for takeoff. But my mind was racing. Had I forgotten something? Did I do everything right? Had I missed a step in our checklist? The instructor pilot was constantly writing on his clipboard, but I couldn't pay any attention to him. I had a bird to fly. I pushed the throttles forward and the aircraft began to roll smoothly down the runway. I released the plane's brakes and we began to build up speed. My co-pilot called out S1. S1 is the speed at which you can no longer complete the takeoff and land safely on the runway. You are at that point committed to takeoff. So far, so good, I thought to myself. The co-pilot called out rotate, at which point we have enough airspeed to sustain flight. I pulled back on the control wheel. As the nose of that 300,000-pound KC-135 lifted into the air, I immediately knew something was wrong. I had to apply full right rudder just to keep the aircraft going straight. About that time, a master caution light came on our dashboard. The outboard engine number 4, on the right-hand side had failed and had caught fire. Now, for those of you that might not be familiar with the KC-135, it's a 4-engine tanker aircraft designed to do mid-air refueling. It looks like a lot like an old Boeing 707 that they used to use for commercial purposes. I'm sure you can imagine, especially with a fully loaded aircraft, 4 jet engines are a really good thing to have, especially on takeoff. When one of those engines begins to fail, the aircraft wants to turn towards that failed engine because you don't have as much thrust coming from that side anymore. So the co-pilot's contacting the tower, declaring an in-flight emergency. I pulled back the throttle on engine number 1 to help compensate for that reduced thrust on number 4. Then I pulled the fire suppression switch. I finally got the aircraft back under control and began to turn back towards the airport after declaring an emergency landing. But as we were turning back, the master caution light came on again. Hydraulic systems failure. The landing gear, which was coming up at the time that the engine fire occurred, had become stuck about halfway up. The hydraulic line had ruptured, and the result was a complete loss of hydraulic pressure. What we did not know at that time was that when engine 4 had failed, one of the fan blades had separated from the turbine and shot right through the middle of our fuselage, slicing right through a fuel line. And we now had a fire on board the aircraft. It was a great flight so far. 1 engine out, no hydraulic power, and now we have a fire on board. And we still have a full load of fuel in our tanks. What else could possibly go wrong? Well, before I even had the chance to complete that thought, we hit a massive wind shear that pushed our aircraft into a nose-down attitude and began to shake the airframe violently. At this point, I knew we were never going to make it back to the airfield. We were losing altitude rapidly, and since we'd only been airborne for just a few moments, we didn't have much altitude to give. I radioed to the tower, Mayday, 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 Condor Flight 121, we're going down east of the airfield. I scrambled to find my terrain charts, finding where I could possibly land this limping bird. And as I did, we took a direct lightning hit, which knocked out both the navigation systems and our ground radar. By now, sweat was pouring out of almost every pore of my body. Holding onto the control stick was almost impossible. I again called to the tower, Mayday, 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 Condor 121, we're going down east of the airfield. You guys need to get out here fast. There was no response from the tower. I could only assume that all communications had also been lost. With no other choice, I directed the aircrew to prepare for a crash landing as I struggled to position the aircraft in the best possible attitude for impact. We crashed 17 miles off the end of runway 31. As the aircraft impacted the ground, it broke into 3 separate sections. As the engines separated from the wings, they sparked a huge fireball that caught several buildings on fire. The main fuselage entered a residential area and impacted a large apartment building. Everyone on board my aircraft was killed instantly, as were 43 civilians who were living in those apartments. And as the smoke of the cockpit began to clear, I remember hearing the words of my instructor pilot. He said, "Son, that wasn't too bad. Next time you'll do better." You see, this was a flight simulator. And although it seemed very realistic to me at the time, the only casualty that day was my own pride and my own ego. After the alarms were silenced, the computers were reset, and the artificial smoke was cleared out of the cockpit, we did it again. Every possible failure that instructor could throw at me, he did. Every systems failure, every problem, every challenge, many of them simultaneously. I later learned that the whole point of this mission was for him to crash that aircraft. No matter what actions I took, the instructor would fail every single system until that bird finally crashed. Now that may sound strange to you, but it would teach me the importance of making quick decisions, correct decisions, at a time when a wrong decision can cost you everything. It took me 14 do-overs before I completed that mission. But each time I learned from my mistakes. I walked away from that experience that day with a few lessons that I learned, lessons that I still carry with me today. First, life is often unfair. Sometimes you will be put into positions where there is no right answer, and nothing you will do will seem to be successful. Problems don't always come when you're ready for them, but rather they come at the least opportune times, and often they come in multiples. So when you're faced with difficult choices, you have a choice to make. You can give up and say, "I just can't do it, it's too hard." Or you can keep going, and you can keep learning, and you can keep trying to fly that airplane until you have no other choice. Secondly, you may do everything exactly right, and things may still go horribly wrong. Life can change in a moment. One moment you can be so confident and ready to take on the world, and in a moment, in a heartbeat, you can be struggling just to hang on. Do what you can, when you can, and be proud of what you achieve. It may not end up the way you wanted, but at the end of the day, you can look back and go that you did the right thing. Third, no matter what, keep going, keep trying, never give up. You may not succeed, and you will undoubtedly still encounter problems, but at least you will know you gave it your all. And finally, remember this: it is the hard times, not the easy times, that will test your strength, your courage, and your faith. The easy times of life can make you think you have it all together, but it is the hard times of life that you will be tested and pushed, driven to do things that you might not ever even attempt. Hard times and hard problems will force you to think outside the box, to push yourself beyond where you thought your limits once were, and you will find new strength. Every man and every woman who raised their right hand and swore an oath to defend our Constitution, to protect and defend our nation's freedoms, will tell you it is the hard times, not the easy times, that have shaped us and made us who we are. Today, we as a community pay honor to our nation's veterans. We honor the brave men and women who did what the call of duty commanded them to do, not whether it was fair or not whether it was easy. They never gave up. Men and women who have dedicated their lives to serving our country and protecting our freedoms. Men and women who have continually pushed themselves through some of life's most demanding problems. They found a new strength within themselves because of their determination to succeed, because they would not give up. As we leave here this morning, may we never forget the sacrifices of our veterans, and may we pledge to do everything in our power to support them and their families. Thank you, veterans, for your sacrifice and for your service. Thank you that even though life has not always been fair for you, you never gave up. May God bless you. May God bless the United States of America. Thank you.